So to really understand the lore of the Vah Shir, I know this has come up a few times, like, hey, who created the Vah Shir? So we got to look at that, right? There are two different kinds of gods in EverQuest. There's like the prime gods that we know of, like that's like Solro, Ralsek, etc. And then we have the spirit gods. So the spirit gods are gods like Drinal and a few of the other ones. But the one that is most significant to the Vah Shir, aka the Kerrans, is Sateb Malni, which is the feral spirit. And it's really the god of primal balance. Okay, so the god of primal balance is the only sort of god that the Vah Shir still worship, though as a race they are typically agnostic. So long ago, the Kerrans existed as a fractured tribal society on Otis. Then eventually, Kajan Karath united the Kerrans under his rule, and they became the preeminent, not really empire, but species on Otis until the Erudites arrived. Now, at first, things were pretty cool between the Kerrans and the Erudites. But eventually, the Erudites began practicing necromancy, and while this didn't bother the Kerrans at first, it became clear that the Kerrans were a convenient target for the experiments of the heretics. Whether or not it was necessarily obvious, a lot of the Kerrans started to just get sick randomly. So the king of the Kerrans, their chieftain, right, Kajan, went to Berudin and talked to the High Council there and tried to explain, what he was seeing. He came home, he got sick, so he was messed with while he was there and he died. At this point is when the civil war breaks out between the heretics and the city of Eredin. They, it's clear what's going on. They start fighting. The son of Kajan, Vah Kerith, forms an army of sorts and sides with the Erudites. But before he can marshal his army, the conflict erupts to such an extent that a huge blast of magical energy hits Sharval, the capital city of the Kerrans, and blasts it. According to the lore, it's suggested that it is physically blasted to Lucklin. But in order for me to respect this game still, I'm going to say that it was magically transported due to the energies of the attack. And it arrived on Lucklin. Now, it's not the same city Vah Shir that we see today, right? Because they started to discover a lot of the natural resources on Lucklin, like the silkworms for their clothing, and most importantly, Trilia for mining and building their structures, as well as creating their arms and armaments. So they slowly begin to master the land here. They ban writing and reading. Why do they do this? Because they kind of have a bone to pick with the erudites and magic in general, and they associate the written word as a big cause behind the rise of the magic that destroyed their society. So that's why the Vah Shir now have a totally oral history. Like their bards know the whole history of their race, and they don't write it down anywhere. Eventually, they discover the Akivans, and what's worse is they realize that the Akivans are this immortal race, which seems cool, but what happens is, like, whenever an Akivan dies, a shade is born, and the shade being born to resurrect the Akivan destroys a pure entity from the spirit realm, which obviously is not cool with the Vah Shir since they worship the spirit deities. So they go to try to parlay with the Akivans, but by now the Akivan civil war has already ended. Atna-Ra leads the Akiva, and naturally Vah Kerith, the king of the Vah Shir at the time, is never seen again. You guys will know if you've ever raided Vexthal that he is out there in undead form, and he awaits an item that proves you've killed the leader of the Akivans and done what he set out to do originally, and at that point he will give you his talisman, which is the best item in Lucklin. So the other big thing that happens in Vah Shir lore is that Kadi Shah, the most famous bard in Vah Shir history, is abducted by the Shisar. They conduct a bunch of experiments on him trying to make a god because they want to use him as a testbed for the project they want to do with Emps Ra, where they want to make Emp a god. They called this experiment a failure, but really it was a success. The only problem is Kadi Shah couldn't be controlled once he became a god. He was mad. He was totally insane. He killed just about everyone who was running the experiments on him, and then he fled somewhere into the Underdark of Lucklin. while he is down there, he created his own race of beings, which we now know as the Gremlings. When the Gremlings were born, they took on his hateful and hostile demeanor. And at that point, it became a big problem for the Vah Shir, because the Vah Shir were mining in what we know as the Acrylia Caverns, right? Eventually, they're mining, and suddenly all these Gremlings come pouring out of the mine shafts and attacking them, and they really push the Vah Shir back, effectively hindering the supply of Acrylia ore that the Vah Shir can get. And that's about the time that we kind of, boom, come onto the scene as the rest of the Nerathians. The Vah Shir have some dealings with the Combine Empire, both parts of it, but they're not too involved in anything. Generally, they side with the Loyalists, which is to say they side with Kata, and they don't really side with the Inquisitors or Lord Inquisitor Saru. But that is pretty much, in a nutshell, the lore of the Vah Shir.